Here we go. All right. Welcome, everyone. I am out of school. School is out. Thanks for joining me on this Friday afternoon if you're in the United States. If you're in another country around the world, it might be a different time of day, but thank you for joining me. We are looking at the vice presidents in American history. All of them. All 48 of them? Wait. I actually don't know how many there are. 1, 2, 3, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 13. Wow. Yeah. So, okay. Hold on. 39, 40, 41, 42. Yeah, there is 48. That's not counting Kamala Harris, the current vice president. But yeah, we are going to do a tier list here. Let me make sure that this is working, first of all. Okay, good. So, before we get started today, first of all, thank you for joining me. I did a U.S. president tier list about 15 months ago, and I was watching it recently. It has like over 750,000 views for some reason. It's not very good. I just did that on President's Day last year, kind of like last minute. I didn't even prepare for it. Most of it was on the cuff, off the top of my head. I didn't have notes. I didn't prepare anything. And then even the picture quality was bad, and the sound was bad. Everything about it was mediocre, but somehow it did really well. So this is kind of a sequel, but I like to think this is a better version of that because, I have a better computer now. I have better setup, and I've actually prepared some notes for this one. So that is what is going to guide me. This will probably take a couple hours, but I'm going to go through a tier list similar to how I did with the presidents. I will take questions at the end, so if you have questions, please hold off till the end, and I'll try to get to all of them. I did see a super chat already. Harrison Len, Mr. B, you have quickly become one of my favorite political channels. You educate as objectively and honestly, and I love your sense of humor as well. Your students are lucky. Keep up the great work. Thank you, Harrison. That's very kind of you to say that. So I appreciate that, but let's hold off on the questions till afterwards. As we do this, if you could please, in the chat, say where you would rank them on the tier list. A lot of these vice presidents, probably you don't know much about. A lot of vice presidents are rather obscure in American history, so I even had to do quite a bit of research for this. So that's kind of partially why I held off on doing this. But we're going to start off with a very famous recent vice president in American history. You'll find out here. So let me first switch over. Make sure that this is showing up on your end. I agree. Cookies are good. No, I don't know. Okay. Okay. So it looks like it's appearing. Let me make this full screen. We have a tier maker that somebody prepared beforehand. So thank you, whoever this was that put this together. And I'm just stilling it. And we're going to go in order of the vice presidents that you see on the screen. Thanks, Harry. Johannesburg and Cape Town compared. I actually have that in my list already, so I will be getting to that eventually. So yeah, we're starting off with... hold on, can you see the screen? Make sure you can see it. All I see is a black screen on your end, so... Do you see it on yours? It's just black. Let me try doing this. Can you see? Okay, the screen is black. Okay, weird. Let me go back to OBS and see what's going on. Can you see now? Okay, we'll just do it like this. That's fine. Okay, so you can see a little bit on my desktop. Maybe make this a little bit bigger. And that way you won't see that in the... Give me a moment here. All right. So apparently we are back to normal. So here are all the vice presidents that we have. Now I'm not including Kamala Harris because she is currently vice president, but I am going to include Mike Pence. So just to forewarn you, I feel like I have a pretty good grasp of his impact, and I'm safe to actually give you my opinion on his legacy. Now, the other thing, the criteria. I'm not... this is different than my videos that I made about the best vice presidents and worst vice presidents in American history. My criteria this time is how well they did while in office. Okay? So that means that if they were only in office for like a few weeks or a few months, they're probably going to be like, meh, maybe I'll stick them at C tier. I don't know. Oh, we lost F tier on this. Gosh, okay, hold on. Let me add a row below. Okay. Those are the wrong colors. This is driving me nuts. Okay, hold on. I had this prepared before, I promise. All right. So now we're good. We got S, A, B, C, D, and F. S tier, of course, is just, off the charts good. And we have F tier, which is the worst. You all know the spiel here. All right, we're going to sing vice presidents who later on became presidents. So, yeah, your boys, John Tyler, Millard Fillmore, Calhoun, Coolidge, all of them are here with us today. So that's another reason why this list is a little bit bigger. I did not include those for my best vice presidents and worst vice presidents videos that I did before. So we're going to begin. And guess who is first on the tier? Right there. It's Dick Cheney. Dick Cheney is going to F. You thought he was going to S, didn't you? So Dick Cheney is still, in my opinion, the worst vice president in American history. I know he's alive right now. I know that he might be even watching this at some point. Who knows? But let me be as fair as I can. He escalated the war on terrorism, I think, single-handedly. Had a huge impact on a bunch of reckless foreign policy decisions. I believe that he is more to blame than George W. Bush. And also had a reckless disregard for civil liberties, particularly privacy, putting so much emphasis on security over personal liberty. And so, programs surveillance programs that was later called out by people like Edward Snowden, the NSA spying on Americans in the name of, fighting the terrorists, defending torture repeatedly, and still to this day. He's always been a war hawk, but he's actually a chicken hawk because he never served himself. He got draft deferments from when he could have served in Vietnam. He got deferments because of his connections, and he's fine with perpetual warfare, but he doesn't want to actually do it himself. And then he's a big reason why we ended up in the Iraq War. So, spreading the big lie of weapons of mass destruction that Saddam Hussein supposedly had. And he did spend decades in government. Before he was vice president, he wasn't so damaging, actually. But he kind of just abused his power once he was there. And I think we're still seeing the impact, especially with the war on terrorism. Like, he really played a big part of kind of screwing things up in terms of world security. I think he's made things worse. Single-handedly, a vice president to have that much negative impact. So I'm sorry, Dick, but you're the worst. You're still the worst vice president based on purely your performance those 8 years when you were VP to George W. Bush in the early 2000s. All right, enough about Dick Cheney. Looks like most of you agree with me. Now we're up to Adlai Stevenson. And Adlai Stevenson is actually surprisingly fairly decent. He's a B-tier vice president. He served as the 23rd vice president from 1893 to 1897 with Grover Cleveland during his second term. He actually enjoyed the role of vice president, was very active presiding over the Senate. I have a quote here that I don't know who this quote was from, but it was from a senator who said, quote, "The most august legislative assembly known to men." He was praised for being dignified, nonpartisan. He was courteous, respectful, professional. Often he was a guest at the White House with Grover Cleveland. He wasn't so much an advisor to the president a lot of times, but he was at least somebody who was there. He regarded himself as, quote, the neighbor to his councils. And they worked well together. I think he was a solid VP. So Adlai Stevenson. All right, Alben Barkley is the next one. Alben Barkley is a B tier as well. Oh, by the way, what'd you say for Adlai Stevenson? Probably a lot of you are like, I don't know. Is this Adlai Stevenson the grandfather of the one that ran against Dwight Eisenhower? Yes, they are related. Okay, Alben Barkley was he's from Kentucky. He served in Congress for many years. Did quite a bit in Congress as well, but he was the 35th vice president with Harry Truman. And Alben Barkley, of course, was he was old when he was there. He was and still is the oldest vice president ever elected. He was 71 years old when he was first elected with Harry Truman. And in fact, why we call it Veep, apparently that all started when he was vice president, because his grandson, Stephen Truitt, suggested the nickname, and it kind of stuck around after that. So, but he disagreed with Truman on many issues, but he was always very respectful about it. He was, I would say, influential in guiding Truman's policies, so that's why I put him so high. All right. What do you all think? Let's check it out. See, a lot of you don't know much about these, so you don't have an opinion. That's fine. If you don't know, Red is Great says, Dick Cheney is supposed to be an S tier. Just kidding, he sucks. Thanks for the super chat, and I agree. Okay, man, I hope that he doesn't find out where I live. Okay, moving on. Now we're up to Calvin Coolidge, who, as you all know, maybe most of you know at least, Calvin Coolidge is one of my favorite presidents. He, as a vice president, though, didn't really do much in those couple years. He was a vice president to Warren Harding before he died. I put him in the C tier. Calvin Coolidge, of course, had a strong reputation before and after his time as vice president, but he really didn't have many official duties when he was VP, invited by President Harding to attend cabinet meetings, but he didn't really have much of a say there. He actually, I think, he was the first vice president to actually be invited to cabinet meetings, so that was kind of cool, but he didn't say much. He was Silent Cal. They did a lot of parties, and his wife Grace mostly was the one who talked, but this is also where apparently, when he was vice president, is when he supposedly had the all those jokes about him being so quiet. Silent Cal, actually, that's where that all originated. So, Joshua Bell, thank you. What do you think about the movie Vice about Dick Cheney? What's your favorite film about a U.S. president? Okay, yeah, Vice I thought was fairly inaccurate and misleading about him. We could have done a better job trying to be more historically accurate. And I think that the favorite film about a U.S. president would be Lincoln. Folha de Papel? I hope I pronounced that correctly. You should check this cool history topic, Portuguese-American diplomatic relations in the Kennedy era. It's very, very interesting and peculiar. Interesting and peculiar, you say. All right, I shall check that out. Moving on with this, though, we are now up to Charles Curtis, the only vice president in American history who is a Native American. The highest to identify as Native American, who was a vice president to Herbert Hoover, unfortunately. He's the only native Kansan, so like he grew up his entire life here in Kansas, where I'm from. Only Native American to hold the post, as well as the first person of color. The second being Kamala Harris, the current vice president. He was somebody who actually really embraced his heritage. He was the second oldest when he first took off as vice president in American history. Oh, and which tribe? The Kaw Nation, of course. Kaw Nation, which there's a lot of course, ties to Kansas. Kansas, that comes from the name, the Kaw people. That's where we get our name of the state. Now, the reason why I put him at C tier is because, well, Curtis kind of went along with Hoover on a lot of bad policies. He was his yes man, and he probably shouldn't have been. He probably should have either been quiet or distanced himself or just countered him, and he did not. He did endorse a 5-day work week with no reduction in wages. I liked that. That was his solution to unemployment. But he had a habit of saying things that were ill-timed. He was trying to be positive, like, good things are around the corner, man. But it was like when people were starving and they, kind of this toxic positivity that we got a lot of this past year, actually, with the pandemic. So yeah, I'm not seeing opinions about where you would rank Charles Curtis, so maybe you don't know Charles Curtis. Check out a cool video by Useful Charts about Charles Curtis, actually, if you want to learn more about him. Okay, the next vice president we have is another C tier. This is Charles Fairbanks. Charles Fairbanks was the vice president to Teddy Roosevelt. He also was a vice presidential nominee in the 1916 election where they got their butts kicked. He undoubtedly had the best facial hair. Let's go ahead and take a closer look at Charles Fairbanks' mustache, okay? Actually, you couldn't even see his mouth. Do we have any better pictures than that? Okay. Yeah, there we go. This is a good one. Look at that. Look at that. Get a closer view here. Can we look at this? Look at that. So anyway, Charles Fairbanks, he was somebody who worked against Teddy Roosevelt's square deal, which I liked Roosevelt's square deal. It was ahead of its time. He was kind of just like a reactionary guy, a Wall Street puppet who, gave in to special interests. So maybe I could have ranked him even lower, but because he didn't do much damage, I'll keep him at C. But I just appreciate his facial hair, so that's sorry. Back to the tier. Now we're up to Charles Fairbanks. As I just did that, so I have 3 Charles in a row. This is why it's throwing me off. Charles Curtis, Charles Fairbanks, and now Charles Dawes is what I meant to say. And he's also a C tier. All 3 Charleses are the C tier, and their first name begins with C. Interesting. Charles Dawes was vice president to Calvin Coolidge after he was elected in 1924. So that full term where Coolidge was actually elected. Dawes, of course, had much experience in politics before he was vice president. He was actually well known for the Dawes Plan, which was dealt with World War I reparations. Got a Nobel Peace Prize for it and all that. So, he had lots of accomplishments. But as far as what he actually did in while he was in office and as vice president. I have to share with you this because this is what made me make him just a C. So there was apparently there was a close vote. And so this is after the Teapot Dome scandal. I want to make sure I get this right. But so you had nominations that were scheduled. And there was one controversial nomination that was... who was the person? I don't think I have it written down. In the wake of the Teapot... Okay. I don't know. Let me just simplify this, okay? So apparently there was an important vote for somebody who was very controversial in the Senate. And one of the main jobs... Well, there's two main jobs of the vice president. That's it. One is to certify the Electoral College votes after a presidential election. And two is to break ties in the Senate. Okay? Now, most vice presidents really don't have to worry about it too much. Kamala Harris has happened to worry about it more than most. But he had the opportunity to break a tie for a very controversial vote, and he chose to take a nap instead. So that is the short story of it, is why I put Charles Dawes at the C tier. He left and took a nap. And because of that... you had a tie, and he could have broken that in favor. But anyway, it was a highly criticized move on his part. Okay, moving on. Now Chester Arthur is also C tier because Chester Arthur wasn't in there that long. He was vice president to Garfield, and Garfield died shortly after taking office. He was there about a year. Actually, those last few months, he was incapacitated because they were trying to save his life. The doctors, of course, made things worse, and Garfield ended up dying. Props to Chester Arthur, though, for being reluctant to take his place and not, like, power grab. But I think, I've always criticized Chester Arthur for his stalwart views. If you don't know what stalwart means... It means like you were for party machine politics. You were for like kind of the hierarchy within the political parties that existed in the late 1800s that heavily kind of controlled destinies of politicians. And if you played the game, then you could get to high office. And Arthur was all about that. James Garfield, interestingly, he was vice president to, was against that entirely. He's like, no, we should judge it purely on merit. And he wanted civil service reform. So I was with Garfield on that. That's why I've always respected Garfield. That's one reason why. Anyway, Arthur eventually lightened his views and met halfway with the civil service reform. So, but still, meh as vice president. So he's at a C tier. All right. Looks like most people are agreeing with me on that. Also has a nice mustache. Yeah. Chester Arthur. Okay. Now we're up to Daniel Tompkins. Daniel Tompkins is a D tier, our first D tier. Daniel Tompkins had so much potential. He was vice president from 1817 to 1825 with James Monroe, the sixth vice president. He was the only 19th century vice president to serve two full terms, believe it or not. But he spent much of his vice presidency outside of Washington, D.C., and when he was there, he just did a poor job in the Senate, really wasn't paying attention. Even when they were having a really important debate about what eventually ended up being the Missouri Compromise, he was not very active in that and seemed indifferent. As it turns out, we later kind of knew why. It's because he had lots of financial problems and he was an alcoholic and he kind of was self-destructive. And so he did not do very well while he was vice president. So Daniel Tompkins. Any of you know about Daniel Tompkins in the chat? Joe Biden, we're not to him yet, okay? All right, so I don't think you do. All right, now we're on to one that's more recent, relatively speaking, and that's Dan Quayle. Dan Quayle did make my worst vice president's video. But I was judging that not just on his time in the vice president as a vice president, but also his entire career. So just judging by his vice presidency, I'm putting him in the D tier as well. Dan Quayle can continue to have old-fashioned views, as I said in my video, when he was vice president. Just really out of touch with a lot of Americans on many things, and I think you can't be like that. You have to be in tune with the American public. And I brought this up with Dick Cheney, and I'm bringing it up again. It's important to me. He was a chicken hawk. He was all about war, but he used his family connections to get into the Air National Guard, Army National Guard, and instead of being sent to Vietnam. So, I don't disagree with all his policy proposals. He was active as vice president. He met with George H.W. Bush, who he was serving with. He tried to help Bush get the votes he needed for important legislation. But I just think he had really misguided views. He was a very pro-war on drugs guy, did not protect civil liberties. So I think mostly it's just his policy ideas that are so toxic that I'm still, I can't get past. And so sorry, Quayle, that's why you're a D tier. You're also still alive. Seem like a really nice guy. I've seen interviews with you recently. I hope you've kind of become more enlightened since those days. But if you go back and watch interviews with him back then, you're just like, this guy is not getting it. All right, so, wow. We're seeing, what do you think about Dan Quayle? Do you agree with me? I saw some S tiers there. I don't know what that was about. All right, moving on to Elbridge Gerry. Elbridge Gerry is where we get the name gerrymandering. I know it's pronounced Gary. It turned into Gerry over time, but because he had a district that he wanted drawn up to help his political chances and party that looked like a salamander, so they combined his name with salamander, the shape of the weirdly shaped district, and that's why we call it gerrymandering, which is one of the worst practices we see today, where they manipulate the political boundaries in order to pick the voters instead of the voters picking the politicians. Anyway, talking about Elbridge Gerry as a vice president, of course, he did other things too. Like, he was one of the founding fathers. He signed the Declaration of Independence, Articles of Confederation. He was one of 3 people who didn't sign the Constitution without a Bill of Rights. So props to that, Elbridge Gerry. I agree with that. But as vice president to James Madison, just a C tier, just pretty average. He wasn't very active. Most vice presidents before 1900 were not very active. But I will say he just wasn't able to really do much anyway. He actually died in office. And so he was only there for less than 2 years. So he actually took up the place of somebody else who was vice president and died. And that was George Clinton, who is next. George Clinton, he made my best vice president's video, but he is a B tier in terms of just looking at what he did while vice president. George Clinton, not to be confused with, no, not that George Clinton, the one who's the musician with the great songs. He would be A tier if you looked at him outside of his time being vice president, but he didn't do a whole lot while in office. Now, he did serve, he was only one of 2 vice presidents to serve in 2 different administrations, so that's pretty cool. Both Thomas Jefferson and James Madison, so the second longest tenure in American history for governors, but and another founding father, Second Continental Congress, yada yada. But again, looking at while he was vice president, Thomas Jefferson ignored him. Like, he didn't even really talk to him. And when George Clinton was actually in the Senate, he tried to be active, but it just seemed like he was not as effective as a presiding officer as he could have been. I kept him up there because, I think he was such an important figure, an influential figure. Just his presence was still important, even though he was still kind of, working his way through it. Now, by the time he was with James Madison in there, he did know what he was doing, but he still was not very active. Well, actually, I take that back. Because I'm pretty sure he has the record. Oh yeah. So no, he did have 14. He had 14. He ended up having 14 tie-breaking votes. So there's that. So George Clinton, I guess, did have some influence there. So maybe that's why. Yeah, I think that's why I put him at a B instead of a C. All right. What do y'all think about George Clinton? Yeah, he would have been A if I include his entire career outside of being a vice president. All right, now we're at somebody else who had a lot of tie-breaking votes, and that would be George Dallas. However, George Dallas is a D tier, and let me explain why. He was mostly about himself. Everything I read about him, even if I had ideas that I agreed with, like I agreed with him that tariffs should be reduced, I disagreed with him mostly on the territorial expansion. He was with James Polk. He was James Polk's vice president. Very identical foreign policy views and very aggressive foreign policy. But he, I think... Well, yeah, I'm not a fan of Polk either for this reason. But I think the fact that he was too ideological and didn't really listen to other opinions much. I think that's the main problem I have with George Dallas. The more I learn about him, and he was also he bragged a lot. Was kind of just an arrogant fellow in general. Oh, sorry, I'm missing. Okay, sorry if I miss any super chats here. Jonna X. Hey, Mr. Beat, been watching for several months. Guess I'll use this to ask if the 1968 election was George Romney versus RFK. Who would you vote for? Wow, that's a good question. I like both of them. I probably would go for RFK, though. I think I liked him a little bit more. Austin Fan 25, and thank you all for the super chats. I just discovered your second channel while watching videos about Nirvana. Then I got this notification. Pretty crazy. Yeah, I have another channel. The Beat Goes On. If you don't know about it, I call it basically pop culture history, but I have videos about history of bands and stuff. And I just released a video about Ferris Bueller's Day Off since that movie. We're approaching the 35th anniversary of that movie being released. And so, yeah, check that out when you're done with this. Yeah, thank you for the shout out. Okay, we're moving on. We just did George Dallas. Now we're up to John C. Calhoun, who's right next to Dick Cheney. He is an F tier. It doesn't mean he wasn't impactful. Clearly, John C. Calhoun has more influence on American history than most Americans. Undoubtedly, he was vice president to two different presidents who were very different. This is interesting. So he's the other one other than George Clinton. So he was Veep to John Quincy Adams. And then he turns around and is vice president to Andrew Jackson. But he didn't really get along with Andrew Jackson pretty much ever. I mean, they were respectful in the beginning, but then the nullification crisis really made them hate each other. But I think the thing that you can't ignore with John C. Calhoun is, in addition to his crazy hair, is the fact that he stood firm on Southern beliefs. Okay, that's not his hair. Let's check out John Calhoun. There's an actual photograph of him. At least one. There it is. That's a famous photograph of him. Yeah, he's being canceled a lot lately because of his crap policy. Here, let me get a better image of the hair. Okay. So, John C. Calhoun, I think he not only did he say that slavery was a, quote, necessary evil like other Southerners did to justify it, but he actually said it was a, quote, positive good. And screw that, John C. Calhoun. Even if I agreed with his beliefs on foreign policy and tariffs, you can't deny his just unabashed support of slavery and him owning slaves and just saying, no, we need to do whatever we can to protect the institution of slavery, being very outspoken about it, not willing to compromise on it either. although he did lighten up a little bit as he got older. So, but I have to give him an F, despite his crazy hair being awesome. Okay, so we are now on to Gerald Ford, who I respect as a human being. I think that he was a pretty solid president, actually, all things considered. Just an average vice president. Wasn't even there that long because we can't really judge him because he was there less than a year with Richard Nixon before Richard Nixon resigned, became the only president in American history to resign. So Gerry Ford, he is the only person to have served as both vice president and president without being elected by the Electoral College. So that's pretty fascinating. But I think he tried to bring people together. So that's why I keep him at C. I say a lot. Hey, Mr. Beat. Stop Laka 674-737. Thank you for the donation. So say, Mr. Beat, love your videos, never miss an upload. Would have Al Gore been a good president if he won the 2000 election? I'll hold off on answering that till we get to Al Gore on this. So that's a great question, though. Okay, so we are now up to Harry Truman, one of my favorite presidents, but as vice president, goodness, he was only there for 3 months. How can we really judge him? I mean, should we even include him on this tier list? Probably not. And he was completely out of the loop. Wasn't his fault, but no one really told him anything when he was vice president those 3 months. Even though a lot of people knew that, hey, we carefully picked you, Truman, because we know that Franklin Roosevelt may not survive his 4th term. Anyway, Henry Wallace, one of my favorite. As a person, my absolute favorite, but as a vice president, one of my favorite. He's our first A tier. Henry Wallace is A tier because mostly I can't get over how much. The more I read about him, the more I appreciate his perspective on the world. And his policies sometimes were misguided, but generally very forward-thinking. He had a lot of empathy. That's the main thing I noticed about him. He also was active as vice president. He had lots of key appointments during... that was Franklin Roosevelt's 3rd term. So only his 3rd term, which just so happened to be... a lot of it was during World War II, when we had just entered World War II. But he had a huge role mobilizing the troops and getting everybody ready. He was an advisor to very important decisions that FDR had to make during the war. One journalist noted that Roosevelt made Wallace the first, quote, vice president to work really as the number 2 man in government, a conception of the vice presidency popularly held but never realized. But I think overall, he was just a pretty inspirational figure. The more I learn about him. Something else I didn't mention, he had a big goodwill tour of Latin America that I don't think gets enough attention. 24 stops across Central and South America, and that was in 1943. I didn't know about that until recently. I'm a big Henry Wallace fan. What about you all? There we go. Good to see lots of Wallace fans. People are still talking about Biden. Goodness. Okay. I am going to be looking at Biden in this video, actually. Okay. Moving on. Henry Wilson, another very good vice president and very good person. Henry Wilson, so we got the 2 Henrys, that's right. One of the most intelligent vice presidents in American history. He was with Ulysses Grant when Grant was president. Henry Wilson was a radical Republican. So again, just like Wallace, ahead of his time, brave and courageous with some of his beliefs, but also respectful and dignified. He was one of the ones who helped start the Free Soil Party, the party that literally was created to stop the expansion of slavery. When he was in Congress as a senator, very influential. But let's focus on when he was Veep. Okay, I think the main thing is that he didn't have a whole lot of responsibilities. Like I think he didn't even. I'm pretty sure he didn't even break any ties. If he broke ties, it was only one tie that he broke. So he wasn't very active in the Senate, but I think the way that he held himself up, everybody liked him, even if they disagreed with him. He was able to charm over Southerners after the Civil War. I just really respect him as a person, similar to Wallace. That's why I put him at the A tier, even though as far as specific accomplishments, you don't see it much when he was vice president. All right, now we're up to, oh yeah, our first Minnesota guy, Hubert Humphrey. Okay. Hubert Humphrey could be either an A or an F, but that's why I put him into C. And let me explain here. Okay, so Hubert Humphrey was actually kind of similar to Lyndon Johnson, who he served with. Good domestic policies, at least in good faith, even though maybe some of them misguided, but genuinely a nice dude, wanted the best for people, trying to lift people out of poverty and trying to get the United States like in a place where we're taking care of the less privileged in general for every policy, whether it be housing or healthcare or education. But yeah, he was also outspokenly supportive of the Vietnam War escalation and Lyndon Johnson's handling of the war. So he refused to criticize Johnson or the Vietnam War at all. And you know, he said some things that actually I think kind of made it worse. When people were getting upset, he kind of downplayed that. And so that's why I bring him down to a C as vice president. All right. So now we're up to James Sherman. If you don't remember James Sherman, I don't blame you. He was vice president to Taft, and I put him at a B tier. James Sherman was the most recent vice president to die in office. He was only there a short while. I put him pretty high, though, because he actually was a nice balance to Taft, to William Howard Taft. They got along pretty well. They at first kind of disagreed on some big issues, but ended up compromising both. And Sherman definitely had regular conversations with Taft and was involved with in advising. He also was just a guy who knew how to talk to people, all different types. He was charming. He was pragmatic and conciliatory. Like he didn't hold grudges. Not very, like he knew how to win over people, and I think that's because of that made him a good leader. So James Sherman, B tier, baby. Okay, guess who's up next? Let me take a drink before I get to this one. Do we all know who's next? Yeah, it's the current president of the United States, Joe Biden. Joe Biden was vice president to Barack Obama for all 8 years of his presidency, a loyal sidekick. Something that I couldn't get over about Biden, not his gaffes, but his just, I don't know, like, I can't get past his foreign policy. He kind of had the status quo type of foreign policy. I put him at C tier. I'm sorry, okay? I think he doesn't get enough credit sometimes. He does get, a lot of people talk trash about him, but he did a bunch of things behind the scenes to help the country. I really do think that. I'm going to read a quote from Obama that he said about him. Obama said, quote, "The best thing about Joe is that when we get everybody together, he really forces people to think and defend their positions, to look at things from every angle, and that is very valuable to me." So I do think that one thing I do appreciate about Biden, including as president right now, is that he does appear to at least reach out to people that disagree with him regularly and interact with them. He may not always listen to them, but I feel like he's also someone who constantly has evolving views. Like I don't think Joe Biden today is the same Joe Biden we saw as vice president. He was instrumental behind the scenes, especially for things like Obamacare, which I've been critical of, but his heart was in the right place. But I think, the reason why I put him at C instead of higher probably because he was pragmatic and, tried to work with all kinds of people with differing beliefs. He didn't break away from the status quo. And these are my similar criticisms, by the way, of Barack Obama as president. We thought it was going to be this like big change in the right direction. That was his whole motto, was literally the word change, and we got mostly the same as I sing in my song that maybe you don't like. But yeah, I have a song about... Don't have a song about Biden yet. I will. All right, John C. Breckinridge. As you may remember from my worst vice presidents video, I did not like Breckinridge. He is F. Had so much potential. Wrong side of history. He chose the Confederacy. One thing about John C. Breckinridge is that he was the youngest vice president in American history. He was with James Buchanan, so these are the years with... James Buchanan, of course, another horrible president. Sorry, James. I know he's not alive. But, I say he had potential because he was a charismatic dude. He was very popular, but after the Civil War began, I think we kind of saw his disgrace. Now, I'm only talking about him while in office, okay? So keep this in mind. Remember, James Buchanan was still president during that lame duck period after Abraham Lincoln was elected. So we have a few months where Breckinridge could have been a leader, right? And I really want you to compare Breckinridge to Mike Pence, okay? And this is why, Mike Pence is going to be a little higher than Breckinridge, okay? Because Breckinridge abandoned the Constitution in those final months, and Mike Pence stayed true to the Constitution in those final months, okay? Breckinridge was a traitor, and after Abraham Lincoln was elected, he turned his back on the country. That's why he's F. And I think most of you agree with me on that one. All right. Now we're up to John Tyler. I give John Tyler a lot of crap, but, he's a D. He's a D tier vice president. He was... I know he was only vice president. He was vice president less than any other, actually. Just remember, he was vice president to William Henry Harrison. So we're talking a month here that he's vice president. But I think we saw quickly the writing on the wall who he was going to be if he were to stay vice president. From what little evidence we have, I have a quote here from a historian that said, quote, "Had William Henry Harrison lived, John Tyler would undoubtedly have been as obscure as any vice president in American history. He would have probably not done much at all from everything I can understand." So that's why I put him at a D versus a C. I understand if you're critical of that. I'm seeing some people put C on here. Oh, 1B. Oh, no, that's from... Okay, stay with it now. Stay with who we're on now. Okay, that's John Tyler. Now we're up to Lyndon Johnson, future president as well, like John Tyler. I speak lowly of Lyndon Johnson as president. I speak highly of him, very highly of him as a senator, and I speak somewhat highly of him as a vice president. He is a B-tier vice president. The reason why... extremely active, working together, and a lot of behind-the-scenes stuff as well with John F. Kennedy, who was president, of course, before his assassination. Kennedy really wanted Lyndon Johnson to be very involved, busy, and informed. He knew that he had all this experience, and he was really successful in the Senate, getting people... I keep saying getting important legislation passed and getting a wide range of people all together to get big things done when typically that is difficult to do. He was good at kind of, using the pressure to get people to get stuff done. So specifically, LBJ, while he was vice president, Kennedy appointed him to jobs like he was head of the Committee on Equal Employment Opportunities. He also was behind the scenes working on civil rights legislation, which of course didn't pass under John F. Kennedy, but they would pass when LBJ became president. He also gave a bunch of important speeches. Not that important, but they were They were good speeches. Like he was active on the circuit, like being there when needed at important events. And so, a very active vice president and influential. That's why LBJ gets to be. What do you think? Yeah, there's no S tier yet. I think. Let's see if you can start guessing who I might be the possibility for the S tier. Is it Spiro Agnew? Okay. All right, now we're up to Mike Pence. You ready for this? Oh, before we get to Mike Pence, got a couple super chats, I think, here. All right. Bruce Beef, thank you, says, would you consider the vice president part of the executive or legislative branch? Ooh, great question, Bruce. It's both, of course. Now, it's supposed to be technically part of the executive branch, helping to work and enforce the law. But really, if you look at the Constitution, it seems more like legislative. They are president of the Senate, breaking ties and influencing laws to be passed. So I would say when I say both, that's not a cop-out. Let me put it this way. I would say it's 60, maybe 70% legislative, and then 30 to 40% executive. That's how I would divide it up. Alex Kawa says, how do you feel about Senate Republicans blocking the creation of an independent commission on the Capitol riot? I have a feeling this question might come up. I think it's a disgrace. I think that it's purely political why they don't want to investigate it, and they care about themselves more than the country. All right, Mike Pence. I went back and forth with him, okay? He's a nice guy. Mike Pence he's a nice guy. I think he's a much nicer guy than, say, Dick Cheney. He's also consistent, even if I disagree with his policy positions, where he is on many issues. At least he's consistent. So I went back and forth. I said, is he a C or is he a D? And I ultimately, I don't know. I think I'm still back and forth. Originally, I was going to say D. Okay. And the reason why is because he was throughout most of Trump's presidency, he was a yes man who just did whatever the president wanted to, even though you could tell he disagreed with him, and it was political, right? It was political. Then the January 6th Capitol riot happened, the insurrection at the Capitol, which, as many of you already know, that really upset me. And I saw that he stood firm and he stood loyal to the Constitution, and he certified the electoral votes anyway. So he earned respect for me. I know that it seems little, but I think it's actually... so I could be persuaded for him to be C, actually. So you in the chat, you're saying, okay, he's a homophobe. Yeah, clearly he has horrible views on gay marriage. Like I can't get past that sometimes. That's kind of why Dan Quayle's so low as well. So, we saw B, D, D, C, D, B, C, B, A. Ooh, a couple A's. He could have spoke out against Trump corruption beforehand. Also, yes. C, D, bruh. B, D, D, C, F, D, D. Okay. I guess I'm going to keep him at D, but just know that I could, over time, have a more objective perspective and put him in a C. That's just where I stand right now, okay, on Pence. Okay. Now we're moving on to John Adams. Whew, he was a great vice president. He was fantastic. Much better vice president than president. He was the very first vice president, John Adams. John Adams was George Washington's loyal sidekick, largely sided with Washington on most issues, but then by the end of Washington's second term had become a full-on Federalist. Washington, of course, was not a Federalist, but generally lean Federalist. Washington didn't like political parties. Remember, one big thing is that John Adams, a lot of people don't realize, he cast 29 tie-breaking votes in the Senate. The only one who did more was John Calhoun. And he brought energy to the office. He was dedicated, similar to Washington. he made it. It could have easily been a meaningless role, but he turned it into something meaningful. Um, Advising the president, making appearances. I think just being engaged with whatever bills happen to be in Congress. I think John Adams really got the ball rolling in the right direction. So, all right. Tracking the core of stuff and more, LOL. Thank you. Learning economics is way better than learning about politics, and are you doing an economics tier list? It would be a short one. I have a few economists I know a lot about, but... All right. Now we're up to William King, who was barely a vice president, and he was with Franklin Pierce just for 6 weeks until he died. That was in 1853. So William King is at a C because we really don't know much about... I mean, he was there for the Compromise of 1850 beforehand. We know that he was one of the ones who helped draft the Compromise of 1850, and he was a guy who probably would have tried to help keep the country together, which we needed more and more of those. But no, he died. Something I will say, he was the only vice president from Alabama. What's really exceptional is that he was this kind of moderate dude who was in the Deep South. So, but yeah, one other fun thing about William King is some speculate that he was James Buchanan's boyfriend. If James Buchanan was in a relationship, because he was never married. Some speculate that he was actually gay. And William King he lived with for many years, and they were pretty close. Who knows? Just putting it out there. Okay, now we're up to our boy Spiro Agnew. F tier. Spiro Agnew. Yeah. One of only two vice presidents to ever just quit. But really he quit because of corruption. He was caught. He took bribes. This guy, this had nothing to do with Watergate, okay? He got in trouble for taking kickbacks. This is from before when he was vice president, but still. I would say that mostly he cared about himself, and his ego kind of drove things. So I'm mostly judging Spiro Agnew on his character. I think that he was arrogant as well, and you saw that with his exchanges with journalists, especially. He was paranoid, similar to Nixon. They kind of went together pretty well. But at least Nixon got stuff done, was productive and actually helped the country in a lot of ways. Whereas Spiro Agnew was, all he did was just talk trash, and he further divided the country. And and he hit 3 spectators with golf balls. So I forgot to mention that Dick Cheney shot somebody, but yeah. All right, let's see. Oh, somebody said G tier for Spiro Agnew. Somebody said F. All right. Any more opinions about Agnew? Whoa, S tier? Is that? Oh. He's from Maryland, so F. No, Maryland's great. Okay. Now we're up to Teddy Roosevelt. Teddy Roosevelt, he absolutely did not want to be vice president when he was asked by the political machines behind William McKinley when he ran for a second term. But he reluctantly took it. Teddy didn't do much while he was there. He's a C tier as well. One of my favorite presidents once he became president after McKinley was assassinated. But really, the office was pretty powerless anyway, I guess. And Teddy Roosevelt was not cut out for that. He wanted to do more. Not much happened, really, when he was vice president. But I guess there was one thing. What was one thing I wanted to say? Oh, yeah, he was only in the Senate for 4 days. That was it. When he was vice president is when he first said that famous line, "Speak softly and carry a big stick, and you will go far." So apparently that's a fun fact for you. Why C? Because I just got when he was vice president, not much happened. I'm not going to put him an F, Not going to put him in A. So it's a lot of these C's are just like, okay, they weren't in there very long. He was only there for a few months. Wow, we're already up to an hour already. Okay, Thomas Hendricks. Hendricks, I would, if this would have been like a year or two ago, I would have said Hendricks was probably also a C, but I learned some more about him, and yeah, he's a D tier. Thomas Hendricks was Grover Cleveland's vice president during the last 8 months of his life. And so this was the first term for Grover Cleveland in the 1880s. He had some bizarre speech in support of Irish independence that kind of was meandering. But also, like, he had a lot of ties. Like, he was pretty well connected with special interests and Wall Street, not Wall Street, but I guess what would become Wall Street. And he listened to those donors who gave him lots of money, my understanding. Now, I'm saying all this, and I think Hendricks actually had some pretty good policy ideas. He agreed with Grover Cleveland on many things. He actually originally was the running mate for Samuel Tilden, who they both famously lost the election in 1876 when they should have won. So he was what you call a Bourbon Democrat, who was all about the gold standard and low tariffs, free trade, and a foreign policy that was humble. I mean, I dig those things. I still dig those things. But, just ineffective as vice president, but also seemed to be more corrupt than I realized the more I learn about him. So, sorry, Hendricks. All right. Like on Rock Games, thanks for the donation. Do you think D.C. should become a state? Yes, I do. I think they should get better representation, the citizens of D.C. for sure. Okay. Now we're up to another Thomas. Thomas Marshall. These go in alphabetical order, by the way, by first name, in case you didn't know. Mostly. I think mostly. Yeah. Do they? Thomas Marshall was vice president during Woodrow Wilson's presidency. I put him in at C. And I thought about D for a while too, but he's just so charming and funny. Thomas Marshall is undoubtedly the funniest vice president in American history. Check out some of his jokes and his stories. But he did actually have a lot of morale boosting speeches, trying to get him to buy Liberty bonds when we entered World War I. He was something that really stands out about him is like, Woodrow Wilson apparently didn't want him to be that involved, and so he tried to be, but he couldn't. I mean, there's a funny line from him. What was the line he said? When he was first nominated to be vice president, he said that he wasn't surprised in saying, quote, "Indiana is the mother of vice presidents, home of more second-class men than any other state." So, he knew that his role would be diminished anyway. He did view the vice presidency as a legislative role, though. But he, and he got involved. He was there for a lot of sessions in Congress and in the Senate, weighing in on the Mexican border crisis in 1916, for example, Pancho Villa and all that. But I think overall, back to Wilson. Woodrow Wilson didn't want him to have much influence. And after Woodrow Wilson had a stroke and was incapacitated for many months, famously Edith Wilson, his wife, was kind of like the first female president of the United States. She was kind of running things, and she didn't even let Thomas Marshall meet with Wilson. So, he was excluded from a lot of stuff. He didn't even get updates about World War I, and he usually got all his news through the newspapers. So, poor guy. Maybe he would have been higher if he was more in the loop, Thomas Marshall. John X says, why didn't he become president when Wilson had a stroke? He should have. Now, this is before the 25th Amendment, though. Remember that. The 25th Amendment spelled it out. It was more like, what do we do before that? The 25th Amendment didn't come along for many decades after that. Oh, now it's Aaron Burr. F tier, as you all know, Aaron Burr, crazy Aaron Burr, who, of course, probably a sociopath, mostly known as the guy who killed Alexander Hamilton in a duel. This while he was vice president, he was actually in office as vice president when he did this. Of course, after that, the president at the time, Thomas Jefferson, gave him the boot, and Burr was like trying to be like after that spent like a lot of time trying to maybe start a war with Spain, maybe start his own country and start a little mini revolution out west, and didn't work out. Just a guy whose ego drove everything, which explains why he wanted to be his own little mini emperor, But the fact that I think it's similar to some of these others, there's character issues. He was paranoid all the time. He didn't compromise very much. A very divisive figure. Even if he had the same beliefs as Thomas Jefferson or James Madison, they, of course, quickly saw that, I don't care that he has the same beliefs as me because this guy is crazy and only cares about himself. Oh, we got some S tiers for Aaron Burr. Is that right? Okay, no. F, S. Oh, we got some trolls. That's what it is. Yeah. All right, now we've got William Wheeler. If you saw my Best Vice Presidents video, he was in that. And yes, he is an A tier. Wonderful person. Everything I've read about him seemed like... I still haven't read there's apparently a biography about him that one of my viewers suggested that really, I think... he probably has a better idea of Wheeler than I do, but everything that I understood about him, or that I've learned about him, he had integrity, really good character, very honest, which is fairly rare for most politicians, not power hungry, modest, and thoughtful. He did not make decisions impulsively and got all sides of issues before he made one. He was ahead of his time in terms of civil rights. He got along with everybody, but that didn't mean he was easily influenced or just try to like kiss everybody's butts. Like he really had a pretty sound moral compass. And as far as specifically vice president, he was with Rutherford Hayes, who remember, people forget Hayes, after he was elected, he's like, I'm only one term. Then I'm out of here. And same with Wheeler. Like, they were true public servants. Even if I think Hayes' presidency could have gone a little better, it was okay. But I think Wheeler was a pretty good sidekick, even though he was pretty low-key. I just like his character more than anything. I think if he hadn't figured it out by now. All right, King John, thank you. What are your thoughts on Ron DeSantis? He's okay, I guess. Like, he at times can be a unifying figure, but at other times I think he plays into some of this identity politics a little bit, which I think we see on all sides of the political spectrum is not, I don't think, really helping our country very much right now. Okay, now we're up to George H.W. Bush Sr. Now, he was I would say, an average president. The more I, learn about him and more I separate from when he was president, because that was when I was a kid, I do view him better and better. But certainly, hands down, as a vice president, pretty solid. He is I'm saying B tier, almost A tier for George H.W. Bush. He also, similar to Wheeler, had a fairly low profile as vice president with Ronald Reagan in the 1980s. But I think he was a very good advisor, a very valuable asset to be around, had a really good relationship with a lot of people and from various perspectives, like, of course, his experience. He even had a good relationship with Democrats, and he didn't confront people and compromise pretty well. So as far as as president of the Senate, I think he was one of those guys who tried to get different opinions, and with different. I mean, this is a different time. People think of like the 1980s and 1990s were. It was still a time where members of Congress that disagreed, that were in different political parties, still hung out after they left work, and they still were friends. And this is well before social media and the internet even. So I know it's easy to wax nostalgic about this time, but I think George H.W. Bush kind of exemplifies that. Even though he disagreed with a lot of Democrats, he still got along with them. But as far as, the next guy, it heavily influenced him, and I think he learned a lot from him when he was in that role, and that was Walter Mondale. Walter Mondale is the S tier here, the first S tier. What do y'all think? Mondale? Yes, S and A. There we go. Okay, now I thought about this a long time, right? I thought about this before he died. Now, he recently passed away. I think he was 94, had lived a long life, but he recently passed away. I'm not just doing this because he died recently. Walter Mondale truly was, I think, now the best vice president in American history. And the reason why is because, we're only looking at when he was with Jimmy Carter as vice president those 4 years, okay? First of all, he brought a lot more power to the position. Unlike any vice president before, very hands-on, very active, very actually in the spotlight a lot of times. And I don't necessarily agree with all his policies that he had back then, but I think somebody who he had dignity and also integrity, but he knew how to get things done. So it was also the pragmatic side of him, I think, stands out as well. He was always acting in good faith. He didn't have all these side motivations that drove him. Like, he wasn't driven by political ambitions. He was driven by, let's solve these problems. We have problems, and then he didn't go into the vice presidency like every vice president before him thinking like, oh, this is just I don't have much power. It's like I can't do much. And he's like, no, I'm going to do what I can as vice president. And Jimmy Carter had a rough presidency in many ways. I mean, the country was still struggling economically. You had the Iranian hostage crisis going on, and you had just a kind of a bummer time in the late 70s in this country after experiencing a kind of a golden age for so long. And so I think that that's funny because I think he became more popular as Jimmy Carter was becoming less and less popular. Jimmy Carter was also like a nice guy, but it just was not going well for him. So I don't know. The more I learn about Mondale, the more I'm just like, you know what? This guy had a big heart, always in good faith, every decision he made, and I think he deserves more credit. I think he needs to be recognized as the greatest vice president we've ever had, frankly. Okay, now we're up to Al Gore. Finally getting to Al Gore, and then I can answer that question from earlier that we had about if he would have made a good president. Okay, Al Gore as vice president was with Bill Clinton in the 1990s. I was still a kid. I remember it pretty well. He was a pretty big advisor to President Clinton. In fact, he was probably influenced by Mondale. Gore and Clinton had weekly lunches together, daily conversations. I would say that he was probably just as right up there with the chief of staff, like a big advisor and influence in Clinton's life when he was president. So I'm going to put him at a B as well. A lot of these modern vice presidents are pretty good, aren't they? Huh? Yeah. Not so bad. He also led on environmental issues. So a lot of people know him after he was vice president. After he ran for president in 2000, they're like, oh, he's the climate change dude, and who, was trying to... An Inconvenient Truth came out in 2004, and that was his whole big deal. But that all started way before, going back to when he was in Congress representing Tennessee. So Al Gore, I think Honestly, I think would have been very similar to George W. Bush as a president. Maybe other than environmental stuff, I think he would have been slightly better than George W. Bush. But as far as foreign policy and most domestic policy, it would have been mostly similar, I think. So that's something that might surprise some of you, me saying that. But okay, looks like we got John X again. Thanks for all your support. Alternate timeline where Gore runs in 2008 and wins pulling a Nixon. That would have been interesting, but you couldn't stop the force that was Barack Obama in 2008. That was a force to be reckoned with. Okay, so Al Gore's B tier. Now we're going back to the early 1800s and, well, the first half of the 1800s. And Martin Van Buren, most people recognize him as an old man, but this is a portrait of him as a younger man. That's what he would have looked like as vice president. He's a D tier as vice president. The reason why Martin Van Buren is a D tier is because he was a divisive figure, was way too political in that position, not a unity person, fed the fire that was kind of starting to divide the country more and more leading up into the years before the Civil War. Of course, he was obviously him and Andrew Jackson were friends, good friends. They agreed on most things. They both fought together the National Bank, the second bank of the United States. Okay, throw that all aside. I think the main reason why I put him at D is because of his further the fire that further divided things. He even had different policies than Andrew Jackson later on. He didn't want the expansion of slavery out west, for example. Throw that out the window. He was a guy that did more harm than good, I think, as vice president in terms of progress for the country. Okay, yeah. Now this next one is a surprise. This next one was a surprise. We have Garrett Hobart. Did I get this one? Oh, Ty Halpern, thanks for the super chat, says, when I was in Nepal, John Adams was the most famous U.S. president for some reason. That's really strange. Wonder why that is. Maybe that's a video idea. Okay. So Garrett Hobart is vice president to William McKinley for his first term. Let me put him at the A tier, baby. This is kind of one I didn't see coming, but I went down a rabbit hole for Garrett Hobart. He actually was a very popular figure while in office as vice president. He was one of the first vice presidents who was a close advisor to McKinley. And also he was similar to some of these other ones he's similar to Marshall, where he was pretty funny. He had good humor. A very pleasant guy to be with. He got along with everybody. And he was the one who had to tell people bad news. For example, McKinley didn't want to tell... in mid-1899, when McKinley wanted to fire Russell Alger, who was the Secretary of War, and McKinley was trying to be nice about it, tried to tell him, but he didn't get the message, and so he sent Hobart to tell him that he's fired, and apparently it went pretty well. Hobart did die while he was in office. He got heart disease only at the age of 55, but I think the main thing is he was kind of McKinley's guy that he could depend on, not only for advice, but because he was really good at communicating. He attended cabinet meetings, was constantly in the Senate, very active in the Senate, more assertive than most of his predecessors had been as vice president. Let's see. As far as tie-breaking votes, I don't think he had much because the Congress was fairly unified at that time at the end of the 19th century. But let's see. I think he only had one tie-breaking vote. But he was there. He was very active. So Garrett Hobart. Yeah, check him out. Now we are up to Hannibal Hamlin. Alex Kawa, thank you. So have you seen Jib Jab's Founding Fathers rep? No, I haven't, but I will check it out. Okay. Hannibal Hamlin was Abraham Lincoln's first vice president, a radical Republican. Was not personally close to Lincoln. They didn't really barely know each other, but they ran together in 1860 and won together. I'm putting him at a C tier. He wasn't very influential in the Lincoln administration, although he did somewhat have influence over the Emancipation Proclamation, apparently. And his terms, this is something that fascinated me, that during the Civil War, Hamlin actually, as vice president, wanted to get involved somehow. So he actually joined the Maine State Guard, his home state, and he he didn't have to take part in the muster because of him being, the vice president, but he still wanted to serve. So I thought that was pretty cool. He thought he could, set an example for ordinary citizens, and now he never, of course, did muster or, saw any active duty, but, it was kind of a cool gesture that he did that. So props, Hannibal. Maybe I put you up at B for that. I don't know. I'll think about it more, but anyway, yeah. So now we're up at John Nance Garner. John Nance Garner was Franklin Roosevelt's third vice president, but he was there the first two terms. Cactus Jack, and he lived longer than any vice president in American history after he retired. So he lived to be, how old was he? 99 or something ridiculous? Older than Jimmy Carter. No, he wasn't. Yeah, older than Walter Mondale was, yeah. So the longest lived vice president in U.S. history. John Nance Garner, though, probably just a C. One thing that's weird about Garner is that he disagreed with Franklin Roosevelt on a lot of issues. He was definitely critical of New Deal policies. Not as much in the first term, but the second term, big time. He was like, this is getting out of control. The final straw was when Franklin Roosevelt had... He promoted the Judiciary Reorganization Bill of 1937, which would have expanded the Supreme Court over time, which critics called it packing the Supreme Court, and Garner was one of those critics. But overall, he was kind of average because he didn't really have much influence over the president or over the Senate. So he kind of, did have influence over the policies as well. What do y'all think about John Nance Garner? C for Cactus Jack. There you go. C for Charles and C for Cactus Jack. Okay, now we're up to another great facial hair, so we have to take a moment to appreciate the facial hair of Levi Morton. Oh, Levi. That was the time of crazy hair. Benjamin Harrison's vice president. Let's get a better... Yeah, here we go. Not bad. Levi Morton was, like I said, Veep to Benjamin Harrison. He was involved with politics for a while before that. He was not that close to Harrison personally, but a lot of the political machine got him in there. And the one thing I did want to share is about the reason why I'm going to not be too easy on Levi Morton is because of the Lodge Bill. If you don't know what the Lodge Bill is, maybe you know about the Lodge Bill because of if you were an APUSH. That's one of those obscure things you have to learn about in APUSH. But the Lodge Bill was it would have been a law that permitted the use of federal force to ensure voting rights for male African Americans in the former Confederacy. It was a law that was, or a bill that would be meant to protect democracy, and especially in the South, where we know some shenanigans were going on. Now, the Lodge Bill reached the Senate floor, and there was a tie. So the vice president, being Levi Morton, would have to cast the deciding vote, right? Well, Morton refused to get involved. He wanted to stay out of it. He was very indecisive. The Republicans in the Senate tried to persuade Morton, hey, come on now. And but he just resisted, and the bill ended up dying by one vote. And Benjamin Harrison later blamed Morton for the Lodge Bill's failure. So because of that, single-handedly, I would have put him at C, but he goes to D. Benjamin Harrison, by the way, I don't really think he was that good of a president. He's one of the worst presidents, but that was a good bill, man. You should have signed the Lodge bill. Okay. So now we're up to Millard Fillmore. I think Millard Fillmore, I got a lot of crap about Millard Fillmore when I put him as a B tier as a president. Yeah, maybe he should have been C tier. I get it, but just because the Know Nothing Party ran him doesn't mean he agreed with the Know Nothing Party. He was. Anyway, Millard Fillmore wasn't that bad. He was vice president to Zachary Taylor for those couple years before Zachary Taylor died in office. I'm putting him at a B tier. Yeah, also at a B tier here, and the reason why, I would say that now we're only talking vice president here. He was involved. He also was against the machine politics at the time. He was kind of an outsider. And he was active in Congress. This was the time building up to the Compromise of 1850. The big debates were the expansion of slavery out west, because they got all this new territory after winning the Mexican-American War. What do we do with it? And he was a free soiler, Millard Fillmore. He wanted the slavery to not be expanded out west. Trying to fight the special interests. He may have not actually had many votes or all that, but he was there where there was some really good debates going on, and important debates about slavery expanding in the territories out west. And so he did a good job leading that discussion. He had a balanced perspective on it. He was one of the ones who tried to compromise, just keep us together. He saw the path we're going on. I think he was up there with Henry Clay in terms of his influence on trying to keep the country together during this turbulent time. So, all right, what do you think about Millard Fillmore? K, D. A lot of people don't have opinions on that. Okay, Andrew Johnson. How could I skip over Nelson Rockefeller? Sorry, Nelson. Nelson Rockefeller. He was vice president to Gerald Ford. I agreed with Nelson Rockefeller on most policies when he was governor of New York. He was actually fairly reasonable, pragmatic, and slightly progressive guy. Many conservatives opposed him, but Ford wanted to bring him there as he wanted him to be his vice president because he thought he would make the tent bigger, as they say, have broader appeal, especially when Ford ran for election in 1976. But yeah, as vice president, I think he was ineffective. I'm going to put him at D. So even if I liked his policies, one thing that was kind of embarrassing for Rockefeller is that he apparently received gifts. He didn't receive gifts. He made gifts. Remember, he's from the Rockefeller family. Lots of old money there, lots of old wealth. He gave gifts to senior aides, including Henry Kissinger, so that was not good. But also, he didn't have much to do. Ford first promised him he'd give him lots of tasks, but he didn't really get those tasks. And he just didn't have much influence or impact, like I said, as vice president in the Senate in particular. So pretty much just sat around and didn't do much while vice president. Ford ran with Bob. I'm sorry. So what ended up happening is the Republicans dropped Rockefeller in the primaries, and they ended up going with Bob Dole as the new running mate for Gerald Ford. So thanks for bringing that up. Okay. So Andrew Johnson, one of the worst presidents in American history, and same reason why I rank him pretty low. He was only vice president for a month, not that long, about as long as Millard Fillmore, not Millard Fillmore, John Tyler was. So I guess I'll put him at D tier, because I can't put him at C tier. Goodness gracious. But he didn't do much. The reason why he goes down to D tier mostly is probably all of you don't know this, but he showed up drunk at his swearing-in ceremony. I only recently found this out. Now, it's still speculative. It might be conjecture, but it's likely that he was drunk at his swearing-in ceremony, and he wasn't making any sense when he was trying to give a speech. Okay. Not a fan of the character of Andrew Johnson, mostly, again, going back to him being so stubborn and paranoid and not working with others very well. Those aren't the characteristics of a good leader, okay? All right, now we're at the Richard Nixon. Now, Richard Nixon made my worst presidents video, okay? In recent months and years, Richard Nixon's, he's looked better and better to me, okay? I will admit this. However, still as president, I think there was more bad than good. As vice president, though, what do you think? Let's see what you say in the chat. What do you think about Richard Nixon? Where should he be? Oh, Ethan Ellis says, opinion on the current Israeli-Palestine conflict. Will you make a video about it? Will expand to full-scale war? Will Israel cease to exist as a country within a decade? Okay, that's a lot. I think it's complicated. I probably could go on for hours about it. I don't think it will expand to full war. I don't think so. I think Israel will continue to exist. My prediction is that it will probably end up eventually becoming a secular state of some sort, where Palestinians have more rights. At least that's my hope. Okay, so you all say for Richard Nixon as vice president. Remember, we're only looking when he was vice president with Eisenhower in the 1950s. Okay, we're saying B, F, A, F, F, B, C, C, B, B, F, C, B, F, C, B, 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 A, C or B, 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 A, crook, F, A, checkers, B, B, F, A, C, A, B, A, C, C, S, B, A, B or C, A or B, S tier, A, B or C. Okay, you're all over the place, folks. I put him at a B tier is where I put him. I think he was pretty dang good as vice president, actually. He was pretty active. He actually excelled in the role. He got stuff done. The only thing I would knock him for is his rhetoric sometimes got a little too Red Scare-ish, a little too McCarthy-ish sometimes, a little too divisive. But other than his rhetoric, I mean, Eisenhower gave him lots of responsibilities. More than any previous vice president. It wasn't until Walter Mondale where you saw a more active vice president. Nixon did attend cabinet meetings and National Security Council meetings. He even chaired them when Eisenhower was president. The most impressive thing is when Eisenhower had a heart attack. This was, when was this? When was this? Oh, that was September 24th, 1955. That was when Eisenhower had a heart attack. It was scary. The 25th Amendment had not yet been proposed. Like, what do we do? Nixon, he presided over cabinet meetings, but he assured everybody, look, I'm not going to try to seek power here. We're just going to wait to see what happens here. He was professional. I think he did fantastic as a vice president. He was just fine. So I think, I don't think he gets much attention for that, but I think that's why he was so qualified also for the election of 1960. All right, what do you say here? John X says, Eisenhower tried to kick Nixon off the ticket for a second term. He said, if you're a Secretary of Defense, you will be a better spot to win in 60. And that was for his rhetoric, though, mostly, okay? Not for what he was, how he was effective as an administrator. That was okay. I think I got all the super chats. Okay, so that's Nixon. We got three more. It's kind of anticlimactic here, but Schuyler Colfax. Oh man, such a tragic life. Kind of similar to Franklin Pierce, because we don't really know. He always said he was innocent, but man, it didn't look very good, dude. There's lots of evidence against you. He got caught up when he was vice president to Ulysses Grant. He was caught up in the Credit Mobilier scandal. I always mispronounce that. I'm sorry. Credit Mobilier. Here, let me just write down. If you never heard of this, I'm going to make a video about it someday and actually pronounce it correctly, I hope. It's a French term. Anyway, he was caught up with that. Lots of evidence saying that he probably was involved. He denied it, though, and this is where he was taking bribes or discounted stock, in exchange for favorable action. Now, you don't have much power as vice president, but still you do have influence, potentially. But I would have put him probably at a C otherwise, because he didn't have much of an active role like most vice presidents. But because of that scandal, I'm going to put him at a D. Thomas Jefferson, you heard of him, right? Thomas Jefferson was the second vice president in American history. He famously did not get along with John Adams. They were friends before, and later on in life they were really good friends, but not while they were in the White House together, or the executive branch together, let me put it that way. As presiding officer of the Senate, Thomas Jefferson was definitely not as active as John Adams, so that's why I don't put him at an A, but I'll put him at a B. Still pretty solid, and he, I would say, definitely was dignified in the role. He preferred to listen as opposed to talk when he was in the Senate. I think he mostly was a guy that wanted to weaken the power of the executive branch, though, so that's kind of what drove him as vice president, too. He was just vice president for 4 years, of course, with that one term with Adams. He cast 3 tie-breaking votes while I was there. But I think the reason why I don't put him at A is because he did start to talk a lot of trash about Adams while Adams was still president, and this would lead up, of course, to the very divisive election of 1800. They got nasty. Still, I think that both Adams and Jefferson were what we think the vice president should be, except now today that role has expanded, of course. So, and last but not least, we have Richard Mentor Johnson. Richard Mentor Johnson was F tier. Okay, he was vice president with Martin Van Buren. Largely unremarkable dude, little influence, and he cared about himself, mostly cared about his own political power and ambitions. He actually, get this, after the financial panic of 1837, when he should have been there in Washington, D.C. leading the most, supporting Martin Van Buren, saying, the economy's going to ruin, what do we do, dude? He left. He took a 9-month leave of absence because he was more concerned about his own finances. He returned home to Kentucky, and he's like, dude, I lost all my money. I got to do something. So he opened a tavern and a spa on his farm to try to offset his financial problems during this huge panic, this huge recession that the country was going through. Despite the precedent set by some of his predecessors, Johnson never addressed the Senate on the occasion of a tie-breaking vote. He did explain his vote once, but yeah, pretty inactive there as well. I just think that, purely a guy that cared more about himself, was not a public servant so much. So that's where I'll leave that. I know most of you probably aren't that familiar with these vice presidents, but I think it's we forget how easy it is. Like all it takes is just a freak accident, and then one of these people is now in charge, and all of a sudden it's a much more Secret Service and a much bigger deal. Whereas if they don't take over, you never hear about them, do you? You wouldn't know who Richard Mentor Johnson was, or John Nance Garner was even. I think even someone like Dan Quayle, who was vice president when I was a kid, a lot of the youngins don't know who that is. So, and he's still alive. So, I think vice presidents they don't get much attention. And so thanks for being here today. I'll take some questions. I'll stick around. Looks like I got one here, a super chat. A recent poll, Ethan Ellis says, a recent poll shows 14% of Americans supporting the Q word that I can't say, or else demonetization, with 25% of Republicans supporting it. Yeah, that's disheartening. I think it shows you how easily people can be manipulated. I used to be more like that. Like, they think that they're like in on some secret truth, but really they're followers. It's like a religion, where they don't critically think about things very much. All right. Thank you for all the super chats, guys. That's really kind of you. Not William, Asaf Bar Yakov. Do you know why did Martin Van Buren become a free soiler after being a relatively pro-slavery president? He was never really pro-slavery. He was silent on it. He never spoke up much about it. He kind of just tolerated it. Andrew Jackson even was not like he was not like John Calhoun, who was like, it's a positive good. Andrew Jackson's just like, okay, this is the world we live in. I'm going to buy slaves because this is the way I can build up wealth. Maybe Jackson even thought personally, like, there's not much evidence of this, but maybe he thought it was immoral personally. He just did it anyway. I think Martin Van Buren tolerated it, but you don't really see him he's never saying anything pro-slavery, so. The chat says you grabbed the picture of Richard Johnson when you talked about William R. King and vice versa. Oh, did I? Could be like they're... Oh, crap. So before I say this, I better get this right then. So, all right. Thanks for bringing that to my attention, John X, okay. So Richard Mentor Johnson, that's William... Okay, so the pictures were... that makes sense because... So this is Richard Mentor Johnson. There we go. And William R. King goes up. Okay. There we go then. That's good. Before I save the... okay. Oh. Before I... There, I fixed it. So this is Richard Mentor Johnson here. Sorry about that. And King is up here. Yeah, they kind of look similar. But I'll make sure before I share this online, I fix that. So thank you for letting me know. Okay. So I'll stick around for like 20 minutes, I guess. Your thoughts on Reagan as POTUS? I was just talking to a colleague this morning about this. It's a very complicated thing. Some days I think Reagan was a terrific president. Other days I'm like, dude, you were horrible. So I think it's a very mixed. I mean, the things that I agree with him on is I agreed with his policies on immigration. I agreed with a lot of economic ideas he promoted, and generally a limited government, but also, just inefficiencies and waste in government specifically. Now, of course, the war on drugs, you all know I'm pretty critical of, so that he escalated, which I think that's one of the worst parts of his legacy. Also, Iran-Contra, also his response to the AIDS crisis, and I think overall, he's probably what the country needed at the time, but it's not all good or all bad with him, so... Oh, thanks, Felix F1. All right. Justin Denny says, when did you know you wanted to be a history teacher? I think, I've loved history since I was a little kid, but as far as being a teacher, I think I knew when I was a manager first, believe it or not, when I was a valet manager for a while. Out of college, I started out in radio and TV, and I decided I didn't want to do that. And so I became a valet manager, is where I help people with wheelchairs and park their cars when they came to the hospitals because they couldn't walk very far when they had to go in for appointments or surgeries or procedures, whatever. And it was a very satisfying job because I was helping people. I love to help people and get paid for it. Why? Help people and get paid? It's a win-win. But also I worked with a lot of young people, and we'd have great conversations. Like I was like 23, 24 years old. They were like 18, 19, and it was like I liked kind of just, younger people kind of, they make me excited about the future, and they're I guess they're inspirational to me, and because the more I hang out with older people, I hate to like generalize because a lot of you are older folks like myself and older, but they're more optimistic. Younger people are more optimistic. Older people tend to be more cynical, and my goal is to stay idealistic for the rest of my life, and to younger people really, I think, help me stay on that mindset. So I love working with people, but in particular, young people who are more curious about the world and learning and not dead set in their ways. Anyway, that's a long answer. Okay. Do I live in Kansas? Yes, I live in Kansas. Yes. All right. Will you do a video about all the president's birthplaces, childhood homes? That's a great idea. I should add that to my list. Thank you for the idea. Do you think Joe Kennedy, who was in Congress and lost a Senate primary, has a political future, maybe even president, or is the Kennedy name not worth as much now? I would say the Kennedy name is not worth as much now. Yeah, younger folks don't really, it doesn't carry the same weight with younger generations as much. So he may be done. Jacob Ryan, thank you. No, not that George Clinton. Mr. Beat, when you were young and asked, what do you want to be when you grow up, was your answer history teacher? No, it wasn't. At one point, I wanted to draw comic strips. Another point, I wanted to be a filmmaker. And then I ended up wanting to be a journalist, which I kind of am now with YouTube, combining with education. My mom told me I should be a history teacher or social studies teacher when I was in high school. And I said, I never forget this. I responded by saying, why would I become a social studies teacher when I hate high school? I did not like high school. And so I completely turned, and my mom was right all along. Moms usually are right. So yeah, I didn't think I would be a teacher when I was a kid. Kind of weird how that works out. Thank you, Caleb Wick, for that donation. Political pins that you may have. Mr. Beat, this is in all caps. I am an 11-year-old, so please answer my question. You had support the ideas that Alf Landon had to spend money during the Great Depression, or did you like the labor programs more? I think Alf Landon, though, he also agreed with these New Deal policies that FDR was signing and Congress was overwhelmingly passing. I think a lot of these programs were, I think, good for the country, and when times are crazy tough, you just have to sometimes spend money you don't have, and it will turn out better in the end for it. So yeah, I think I would have been on the side of FDR in 1936 for that reason. Austin Fan 25, if Jackson does get taken out of the 20, who would you put? Harriet Tubman, of course, that's already going to happen. It looks like the Biden administration has been expediting that process, apparently. That's what I read the other day. That would be so cool if Harriet Tubman does actually get on the 20 here, which is looking like it's going to happen. It's going to happen. What are your thoughts on Coolidge being blamed for causing the Depression? I think he shouldn't get blamed for the Depression. I think most presidents really shouldn't get blamed for the economy or credit for the economy. Like President Trump was taking credit for the economy, but then when it got bad, he's like, oh, well, that's not my fault. Well, dude, you either embrace it or you don't. The thing is, politicians shouldn't do that, okay? Because a lot of things are out of their control with the economy. A lot of times they're reacting to things that already happened and so I think that, especially the president, you can't really pin the economy on just the president. So I think it's a bit silly. They do have influence in terms of like maybe, nominations for the chairman of the Federal Reserve. So maybe that, but other than that, they don't really have much influence. Antonio Silva says, thank you for the super chat, says, what do you think about the U.S. withdrawal on Afghanistan? From Arizona, represent Arizona. I think they should have withdrawn from Afghanistan a long time ago. Why are we still there in 2021? It's the longest war in American history. So, we got Osama bin Laden, what was that, 2013? It's been 8 years since then, so... All right. Do a collaboration video with Mr. Beast. If he reaches out, I'll think about it. Who is your favorite current governor? Laura Kelly of Kansas is popular. Yeah, Laura Kelly. I like her as a governor. She's my governor here in Kansas. I think there are a lot of governors that I do respect. I'm not a big fan of Gavin Newsom. I'm not a big fan of. He's the California governor. I'm not a big fan of the Texas governor either. Oh gosh, my name's blank. His name's blanking on. Texas is. Help me out, chat. Texas governor. I'm not a big fan of him either. But the DeWine, Ohio governor, I think he's doing good things. No, gosh. Texas governor. Abbott? Yeah, Greg Abbott. That's who it is. Okay. Not a big fan of him either. Okay. Do you think gerrymandering will ever be abolished? I do think so. I think that's where I remain to be optimistic, and I think it's going to start with some courageous leaders that are already they're going to have to at the state level. They're going to have. This is something that has to happen state by state to begin to fight gerrymandering. Howie Hawkins, I don't know a whole lot about him. He's the one who ran for the Green Party, right, in 2020. Right? I'm not going crazy here, am I? Yeah, he was their nominee in 2020. Didn't do very well. I think he's pretty standard Green Party guy, so that's my understanding of him. I could be wrong. Oh, the light went out. Maybe that's a sign I need to wrap this up. Okay. I'm going to see if I got any other chats that I missed. Sometimes I missed some of these. Okay, I think I got them all. Okay, any last questions before I wrap it up here? Okay, Matt Calise, thank you. In your opinion, when did the six-party system start? Are we in the six-party system? The fifth-party system started with Reagan, right? That's that's New Deal. So the sixth is with Reagan. That would be with Reagan. So we're still in it. So I would say, this would be, I think it started mainly with Reagan, or you could even trace it back to Barry Goldwater. I think the seventh party system is going to start soon. I think we might already be seeing the beginnings of it. We're seeing a Republican Party that is, it's not even the same as it was 4 years ago. Hold on a second. Let me get this switch this light out so you can see me. Go a little bit longer here. We'll go a little bit longer. That bugs me that the light's not working. Oh man, come on. There we go. All right. Any advice of someone who's studying to be a history teacher? Well, the good news is that it's a little bit easier these days to become a history teacher. There's more job opportunities, so I think that's good for you. It's a secure job. It's I think your passion for history can't be the only thing that drives it, because you're going to have kids that couldn't care less about the content. And so I think it's really important that you like people, that it's just as much about relationships are the most important thing. Building relationships and inspiring kids to be better human beings, that's the most important thing. All right. Thank you, Gurgieto. Sorry if I mispronounced. Drew Balford says, thoughts on Greg Abbott versus Matthew McConaughey. Oh, I'm glad you brought up Matthew McConaughey. That's exciting to me. I'm a big Matthew McConaughey fan. After listening to his interview on Joe Rogan, I was like, I really like the way he thinks. He seems like a unifying figure, kind of like The Rock, or kind of like Arnold Schwarzenegger, where he's pretty moderate on most things. Boring centrist. So yeah, Matthew McConaughey. I hope he does decide to go through with it. Crap, I think I just closed out one. Did I miss it? Yes, there it is. Okay. No, I already answered that one. Okay, we're good. Alec Vernald just got his first job as a public school history, or first public school history job. Congratulations, Alec. When will I run for political office? Tree Kangaroo says, I just don't want to, but if enough people really want me to, I guess maybe it would be public service. It would be something I would just kind of plug my nose and do. It's not for me. This is so much more fun. Teaching. Jacob Bryan, under what possibly insane scenario would you think would have to be taking place for a third party candidate to receive electoral votes again? We might be seeing it in 2024. We're seeing a faction already. Like we see the people that are loyal to Trump. It's really it's a minority. It's like a third of the country. And then you have like another third who's kind of like, I don't like either parties. And then you have the Democrat loyalists, not so much Biden loyalists, but it could be Harris loyalists or any other Democrat loyalists. So if they have like a more establishment person running in 2024, assuming it is Biden or Harris, and you have Trump, then I think that could open the door for a third possibility. My hope is somebody moderate, like The Rock or something. Who knows? I know that seems crazy, but Dwayne Johnson bringing the country together, hey, you never know. But I do think I think we're going to see some crazy. It's going to be a crazy decade. It really is. I'm not just saying that. I really think we're going to see a lot of big changes this decade in terms of our political candidates and just reforms. Okay. Ethan Ellis, Abbott versus Beto versus Matthew. Who wins in the three-way matchup? Matthew does. McConaughey does. That would be more beneficial for McConaughey. Because I think that he'd take more from Abbott than the spoiler myth. That's a spoiler myth, though. But I think people, in terms of when I say take, I mean people would be more motivated to vote for Matthew McConaughey versus being motivated for Abbott or Beto. Okay. I want to make sure that I got the super chats here because occasionally I miss them, and that's not cool. The presidents before George Washington? Probably not. I mean, I'm not just into it as much. Full breakdown of We Didn't Start the Fire coming soon. I am going to do a live stream where I do another game of some sort. So you might and I have a I don't know if I should reveal the surprise. The heck with it. I'll tell you. So I'm going to have a geography competition. This is something I came up with before Spaghetti Road did his thing that I was part of. So check out Spaghetti Road's video as well. But I'm going to do a GeoGuessr competition here probably in a couple weeks. So start the movement. The Rock. Man, a lot of messages are getting deleted. I guess my mods are on the ball. What do you think about Kasich and Hogan running? Who's Hulk Hogan? Is that who you're talking about? Oh, weird. Okay. Oh, thank you. All right, I'm going to wrap things up. It's been a couple hours. I want to congratulate all of the students out there who made it through another school year, because the school year is over for me. And it's over for many of you watching. Some of you have to go into June, so hang in there. You're almost done. Have a wonderful Memorial Day. Oh, one more Jacob Ryan, presidential elections of Mexican history. I want to do more Mexico videos for sure. That's definitely on the radar. But yeah, thank you for your support of this channel and for watching. I have another Supreme Court briefs coming next video, so that's something to look forward to. I know some of you have been wondering about that. Oh, Larry Hogan. Yeah, not Hulk Hogan. Larry Hogan, for the Maryland governor, he's Republican, but he's a fairly moderate guy. Or no, is he Massachusetts? Oh my gosh, Larry Hogan. Yeah, he's Maryland. Yeah. Okay. Folha de Papel. I found a book in my home from 1791. Wow, that's pretty cool. George Washington was POTUS then. He was. Don't lose that. That's probably worth some money. All right. Thanks all for watching. Have a wonderful summer, and we will be doing this again here, probably more over the summer because I'll have more time. Woohoo! All right. Stay safe out there.